I'm here today with Jacob Hudnut. A lot of you know him as one of our fantastic criminal defense attorneys here at Spar and Bernstein. He's been on the Brad Show Live many times, breaking down a lot of legal issues for you. We're here today to talk a little Bill Cosby. Now, a lot of you remember Bill Cosby from The Cosby Show, arguably one of the most famous sitcoms and certainly one of the most well-known and successful sitcoms in American history. He was known as America's dad. He was to many, the first very positive, upscale African-American family portrayed in a successful show on television. It ran through the 1980s and early 1990s, and he portrayed himself on the show as a loving, caring, nurturing, upscale, wealthy father with all the regular family issues that a regular American family stereotypically would have, raising children and their teenage problems. And always Bill Cosby came to the end and figured it out for his family, and it was funny and touching and loving all at the same time. And that's how we remember Bill Cosby.
America's dad.
America's dad, correct. But unfortunately, for all of us, as well as their alleged victims, he has been accused of sexual molestation, abuse, assault, rape. He was charged with aggravated indecent assault for drugging and molesting a woman in a suburban home in Philadelphia in 2004. Now, he says he's innocent. He was charged. His offenses could have landed him in jail for up to 30 years. This is serious offenses being levied against him. In January 2017, after 6 days of deliberation, the jury couldn't come up with a decision. Some wanted to convict, others wanted to find him innocent, and it ended up being a mistrial. As a result, he walked away free, not guilty. Now the prosecutors are bringing back again a new trial with the same charges against him with a new jury. They are not done with him yet. His retrial date is scheduled to begin April 2nd, which is next week. Now in March, Jacob, as you know, because this is what you're here to talk about, there was a major victory in the Cosby trial handed down to the prosecutors. They were able to get a judge to agree to allow 5 additional accusers to come into this trial and testify about what Bill Cosby did to them. Now, these accusers are not the victim in this particular trial in which they are trying to convict Bill Cosby on. And these allegations that these accusers, these other 5 women are coming forward with who are going to be able to testify in this trial, these allegations that they say Bill Cosby also did these things to them as well happened so long ago it's beyond the statute of limitations. So I'm here with Jake, and we were reading about all of this, and I said, Jake, how does this all happen? How do they allow somebody to come in and say, Bill Cosby did this to me 25 years ago? How is that in any way evidence that he did something to this woman in 2004?
Excellent. Yeah, I thought we'd break it down for the folks at home because it's in the news. This would be called character evidence.
Okay, so let's break it down. For the layperson out there, we like to call him the armchair lawyer.
There you go.
Okay, let's break it down. What do you mean by character evidence for our armchair lawyers out there?
Sure. To put it as simple as possible, character evidence in a criminal trial first depends on whose perspective. For a prosecutor's perspective, it's the idea that this defendant is a bad person. For a defense attorney's perspective, if they choose to put character into evidence, it would be that this person, my client, is a good person. That's at its core what character evidence is. And beyond that depends on when it's permissible and when it's not permissible.
So how is character evidence used by a prosecutor in this particular case to prove, well, he's a bad person, so therefore he did it? How is that allowed?
Well, so there's 2 steps. Generally, the presumption is against character evidence, particularly if it's offered to show that the defendant's a bad person. That's called criminal propensity, right? So if you're on trial for dealing drugs, the prosecutor can't introduce evidence that you once jumped the turnstile to say, oh, he broke that law, he must have broken this law. That's impermissible.
So how did it, you've looked at this, how is it possible then, okay, that Bill Cosby has character evidence being brought against him by 5 other women that just basically say he's a bad dude, and therefore he did it? How come the judge admitted it in this particular case?
In this case, the judge was able to make this ruling because the prosecutor successfully argued a connection between that character evidence and the case that's before this jury. There's generally 5 circumstances in which that's allowed, and they often overlap. In law school, they teach you the acronym MIMIC evidence, 1 letter for each word. It's motive, intent, mistake, identity, and common scheme or plan.
Okay, so let's break it down again for our armchair lawyers out there. All right, so the prosecutor came in and they said these 5 witnesses, okay, who will come and testify and say Bill Cosby is a bad guy, and therefore he had motive, intent, and all of those MIMIC acronyms were in there. How did they convince the judge in this particular case to allow these 5 witnesses to come and testify?
Sure. A prosecutor doesn't have to argue all 5. I think in this case, a few of them were hit on, but the biggest one was common scheme or plan. Bill Cosby has been accused by over 60 women of these types of acts. And what's very startling about those accusations is that there's a lot of similarities. It's basically the same MO, as you would say. Each one of them basically more alleges that he invited them into a space that was his, whether it was a home he was staying at, his home, a hotel while he was on the road doing comedy, offered those women something to drink. They didn't feel quite right, and then they woke up feeling as if they had been sexually assaulted. Very specific and similar allegations that was able to allow the prosecutor to argue common scheme.
Now, what would you have argued if the prosecutor comes in and says, we got these women that say 20 years ago Bill Cosby did something to them, okay, and we want to bring them in to prove that if he did it to them 20 years ago, then he did it to this woman in 2004.
Sure.
What would your defense be to that? What would your argument be to say that should not be allowed?
I would argue unreliability. I would argue that we are circumventing the statute of limitations and the reasons there are statutes of limitations, which are to protect people from accusations that happened so long ago. It's less fresh in witnesses' minds. There's less access to investigating your own defense. I would argue all of that, and I would say, one of the things that mimic evidence is so dangerous is because the jurors will get a very specific instruction after they hear from this evidence from the judge, and the judge will say, you are only allowed to consider this evidence for the purpose of drawing the link between these specific actions of drugging people under very specific circumstances. You're not allowed to listen to a bunch of different women say this and say, you know what, he's a bad person, we need to find him guilty.
I will say this, after reading everything about Bill Cosby, I'm actually quite disappointed because I actually liked him a lot. He was one of my favorite entertainers, and now, when I read this, I don't like him so much anymore. But I will say, as an attorney and somebody who is more interested in protecting people's civil rights here in America, I would argue that allowing 5 women to come in and say he did this to me 25, 30 years ago is so prejudicial that an average layperson who's on a jury is never going to be able to distinguish between what is being accused by this woman. Did he on this specific day do this? And being able to differentiate that from listening to 5 other women. They parade everybody in saying he did it, he did it, he did it, he did it. And then, to a layperson, even me as an attorney, when you read, all these accusations, person after person after person, you would say, well, then obviously he did it. Mm-hmm. Okay, without really considering the specific facts that they need to prove for that specific event.
For that one event in 2004.
Correct.
And what you're saying right now is precisely the argument that a good defense attorney will make on the record outside the presence of the jury to preserve this issue for appeal. Because 110%, if Bill Cosby is found guilty in this trial, defense attorneys are going to have a field day taking this up to the appellate court and reversing this judge's decision, because the risk of prejudice is just too great to not appeal if he's found guilty.
Now, if they bring this up on appeal, does he sit in jail while the appeal is going on?
That's a really good question. I think, given his age, I think there'd be a very good argument for what's called bail pending appeal. In this country, most states and jurisdictions do allow some form of bail while your case is being appealed. He probably has great means and will probably be able to afford some type of bail so that he will not be sitting in jail.
It's really interesting because he's 80 years old right now. And, appeals processes, I don't know the appeals process particularly in Pennsylvania because this is a state case, but appeals processes can take years and years and years and years. Even if he's found guilty and they allow him to stay out of jail on bail pending the appeal process, which I'm sure there's at least one or two appellate level courts that are going to take a look at this, and they're going to take a very good look at this because this is a very well-known and famous actor, and the appellate courts in Pennsylvania are going, a lot of people are going to be looking at every word that they put in this decision and what their decision is. So this is not going to be a quick turnaround on an appeal. It's very possible that he can, even if he's found guilty, he'll never spend a day in jail because he'll keep this on appeal for such a long period of time that he'll die before there's a resolution to this.
Yes, and it's a short opinion. It's 2 pages, which a lot of people took issue with. It didn't have a strong application of the controlling law to the particular facts, and oddly, the judge gave the prosecutor just 5 slots to fill. The judge did not pick which women could come and repeat their allegations. The judge left it to the prosecution. So there might be additional motion practice from the defense. It's a very bizarre and risky ruling for a trial judge to make.
So tell me how in your particular practice, because you've represented lots and lots of people, how are you, because now let's flip it around. This is the prosecutor bringing in character witnesses, accusing Bill Cosby of doing things 30 years ago, and really it's almost like muddying the waters in a way. The prosecutor knows exactly what they're doing. They're trying to muddy the waters a little bit, and even though you're only supposed to use it for his own character, it's just common sense that you would say somebody who hears the same story from 5, 6, 7 women would end up saying, yeah, of course he did it then. Mm-hmm. He continuously does this. Now, you can use it also for your advantage as well as a defense attorney. Let's talk about one of the times you've done it as a defense attorney in your practice.
Yeah, I mean, we get less opportunity to, because quite often defense attorneys don't have to put on a case. We just poke holes in the state's case. I did once bring in character evidence regarding a prosecutor's witness to successfully sort of attack that witness's credibility, but also present kind of an alternative theory of what happened. I represented, it was actually my first trial ever. I represented an individual who was accused of having several glassine vials of heroin prepackaged for resale, found in a jacket that was his. He maintained his innocence. He did have a prior record, so he actually faced life in prison if found guilty of that, would not take a plea, and so we went to trial. Other than it being found in his jacket, it was actually his uncle that called the police and said, my nephew is staying here. He's selling drugs. Come find his coat. Come find his drugs. It was all very suspect, but the prosecutors ran with it. That same uncle had a drug conviction from about 15 years prior. It was too old for me to bring in under general credibility impeachment because he had sort of seemed to have rehabilitated since then in terms of not being rearrested. So I turned to mimic and argued motive to the judge, saying that for all we know, those drugs could have been
the uncle's.
Yes, and therefore he had a motive to lie, or that he wanted his nephew out because the nephew was sleeping on the sofa for months and months and months. So he took his own drugs, put them in my client's pocket, and called the police, and it was all a scheme to get the deadbeat nephew out of the house. And it was kind of a full court shot, but the judge let it in, and the jury was able to hear about this uncle's prior drug use.
Which then put some doubt in whose drugs they were.
Yeah, it was interesting. The jury sent out a question while they were deliberating, has my client ever used drugs? Obviously, a judge can't answer that when a jury's deliberating, but when the judge wrote back, I can't answer that. You can only consider what was in evidence. They acquitted within a half hour. So clearly, the drug.
Yeah, and what you did was muddied the waters.
Yeah.
Put that doubt in the jury's mind, even though you were just using that to impeach the character of a potential witness. You've now basically muddied the whole waters for the entire thing, which is what these prosecutors have done with this judge's decision here in the Bill Cosby case. I mean, I would be very surprised if you bring in 5 women now who all say, he did it, he did it, he did it to me, 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 that a jury wouldn't come back, just knowing that and nothing more, wouldn't come back and say, well, then obviously he did it to her as well. So right before we end, Jake, let me ask you a question. What do you think of and by the way, these are many of the women who have accused Bill Cosby. That's what we're looking at here right now. So what do you think of how much does the judge take into consideration everything that is going around him that has nothing to do with this trial? For example, where the Me Too movement is very prolific right now, and it's in the news, and women are coming out accusing many famous people of doing many things to them in terms of being sexual abuse and rape and molesting and harassment. How much did the judge, do you think, or do judges generally take what's going on around them in the world and put it into a real-life decision?
Generally, judges kind of seem to be removed from the particular politics of the moment. They certainly bring their own ideologies to the bench, particularly in most, or I should say, it's the better practice for judges to be appointed to the judiciary by governors, and in the federal system, the president. Pennsylvania does elect some of the trial court judges. So I could see the current Me Too movement having an effect on this judge's ruling.
Because they got to worry about being elected.
Yeah, they got to worry about the pulse of what's going on. You do, in jury selection, though, I'm sure that this is a nightmare of a case to pick a fair and impartial jury.
Nobody has an opinion on this in Pennsylvania.
Right, because this is the hottest issue.
And it's in the news every day. In this new installment of Celebrity Rap Sheet, the celebrity in our rap sheet today, Bill Cosby, sexual assault case, began on April 9th. We're going to see how the case proceeds. We're going to be talking about it in our episodes of Celebrity Rap Sheet. But right now, there have already been some interesting developments, surprisingly or not surprisingly. Just to briefly recap, Cosby is charged with drugging and sexually molesting Andrea Constant in his suburban Philadelphia home in 2004. He says it was absolutely consensual, and she agreed. No one's questioning whether or not they had a sexual encounter, but he's saying she agreed to it. So we have with us today, who's been following this very, very intently on a regular basis, Jake Hudnut, one of our fantastic criminal defense attorneys. Jake, thank you for coming on again. I know you've been watching all the goings-on here out in Pennsylvania with Bill Cosby. First of all, Jake, a lot of interesting turns of events. The first one being that the defense team tried to get the judge thrown off the case. What happened there?
Yeah, so rather interestingly, the defense team filed a motion that the judge should be recused. They tried to kick him off the case. His wife is an advocate for sexual assault victims, very committed to that cause. So the defense drew attention to that fact and said that it might affect the judge's fairness and ability to be impartial. And
the judges said,
he said
no dice, right?
You took the words out of my mouth. No dice, no good. In a very emotional ruling, he said that his wife's feelings and involvement had no impact on his ability to be fair and impartial. It's kind of interesting, the old expression, nothing new under the sun. There was a very, very similar motion made, an issue presented in the O.J. Simpson trial when they tried to excuse Judge Lance Ito because his wife had worked under Sergeant Mark Furman, and that also went nowhere.
And that also went no dice.
Yes, no dice in that one too.
And OJ was ultimately found innocent. And, you know, in years later, Judge Ito was made out to be he just wanted the celebrity himself.
Yes.
So he didn't want to get off the bench.
Yes.
What do you think of the ruling?
I think it's more about the motion in the first place. It's a tricky place to be in as a defense attorney, to stand in front of the judge and say, you can't be fair, you can't be impartial. It's a bit of a risk. But he's got a great defense team. This is the same lead attorney that defended Michael Jackson. He knows what he's doing. And really, the reason it's important is because, and we talked about this last time, it's one more issue that's reserved for appeal. If Bill Cosby goes down, the defense attorney has reserved this issue. He's raised it. He's made a record of it, so an appellate court can revisit it and look at it again.
So the risk is that you pissed off the judge.
Yes.
Yeah. You said, Judge, you're not going to be partial. You can't give us a fair trial. So I want you off this trial. And the judge says, nope, I can absolutely be fair. So the risk is that now the judge is kind of pissed off at the Bill Cosby team. The pro side for Bill Cosby is that the one thing is that, well, it's something to appeal.
Yes, because you really don't raise new issues on appeal. It's got to be stuff that you say that the lower court got wrong. A good trial attorney is doing two things at once at trial. They're fighting the fight in front of the jury and the judge, but they're also preserving issues for the appeal. And that's kind of the unseen battle that a good trial attorney is fighting, because you want to save as many issues in the record so that you can revisit them if, unfortunately, your client is found guilty. So
now that was the first day, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now there was fireworks on the second day as well, legal fireworks on the second day. The second day, the same judge who says he can be fair to Bill Cosby actually gave him a very strong ruling in his favor. Talk about that.
Yes. So the judge ruled that a woman by the name of Marguerite Jackson can testify on behalf of the defense, and basically she will say that the main complainant in the case, the main alleged victim, had made certain comments in the past that Ms. Constant, the main alleged victim, made overtures about framing a celebrity and lodging allegations against a celebrity looking for a payday.
So this is really going to hurt the prosecution. You have a woman coming in and Cosby saying, listen, it was consensual. Okay, and this woman says, no, it wasn't consensual. And now you have a woman, a third party coming in and saying that the accuser said to her in a separate conversation, I want to frame a celebrity.
Yes.
That's huge. That's
yes.
going to put some doubt in a lot of jurors' minds
yes.
of who's telling the truth and who's not.
Yes. It's also a big hearsay exception. So the judge has really handed the defense something to work with and kind of create that reasonable doubt.
So why was this not allowed in the first trial?
Again, there was a bit of there was hearsay and there was unreliability, because the main alleged victim had indicated that she didn't know who the heck Marguerite Jackson was. Her statement and her position has kind of evolved since then. Ms. Jackson alleges that the two of them worked together for many years, that they traveled on business trips and shared hotel rooms. The main alleged victim now acknowledges that she does remember somebody named Margot, who is presumably Marguerite Jackson. So there's a bit of a nexus, there's a bit of reliability to what Ms. Jackson is saying that didn't exist in the first trial.
So now let me ask you this question, because now, you know, you're a juror. And you say, okay, you got Bill Cosby, he says it was consensual, and you got this other woman who was the victim who says it's not consensual, and now the only other person, at least that we know of, that's going to be testifying on behalf of Bill Cosby is going to say, listen, she told me on the side I'm going to frame a celebrity, and here's a celebrity, Bill Cosby. Mm-hmm. Is that enough to put doubt beyond a reasonable doubt that he forced himself on her?
Absolutely. If I was, I mean, that's a great closing argument to make. Certainly, they look to be in a better position than they are without it. And again, you know, as a defense attorney, you're not proving your client is, and you're just raising a question that makes sense, a reasonable question. And that's certainly reasonable doubt.
Yeah, to me, that's reasonable doubt. I mean, that is a huge huge victory for the defense and Bill Cosby. Now let me ask you this question: can the prosecutor go and impeach a witness with somebody else? Can they bring in somebody else to say, well, the person who's saying that, I don't know if they have this person, I'm just asking a question. You know, they're bringing in this third party, and the third party's saying that the accuser wanted to frame a celebrity. Now we bring in the fourth party who says the person who's saying the accuser wanted to frame the celebrity, she's a liar. Can you do that?
Yes. One of the things when you're a defense attorney you have to watch out for is what you open the door to. The judge will say, well, counselor, you open the door to it. So while a prosecutor can't call witnesses to bolster their own witness, like a prosecutor without Ms. Jackson couldn't line up a bunch of people to say
she's an angel and she would she would always tell the truth.
Exactly.
Right.
But once you open up the door to her perhaps being a liar, then the prosecutor is allowed to rebut that. And one of the hearsay exceptions is kind of not rehabilitating, but refuting an allegation of lying. So sure, whenever you put something in play, you've also got to think, well, what can they come back at it with? So certainly it could open up the door to a whole host of rebuttal witnesses.
Yeah, and it's going to be very interesting because now the character of the accuser is in play.
Yes.
So we're going to find out a lot about this woman that we otherwise would not have been able to because of this ruling. Any other interesting rulings?
That's about it so far. I mean, the judge did kind of reserve and say that he might give some limiting instructions after this testimony is all heard, which is kind of important because that's where the judge kind of lets the jury know what they can and can't do with what they heard. And again, there's more opportunity for attorneys to object and preserve all these issues for in case Bill Cosby does go down.
Now this is happening in Pennsylvania, this trial. All right, Bill Cosby is obviously a very well-known, famous, one of the most famous black actors, comedians of our time. The accuser is a white woman, not as obviously as well known as Bill Cosby. What was the composition of the jury, and how much is race going to play into all of this?
So the way that the 12 main jurors are seated right now, and this could change depending on excusals and alternates, but right now it's 10 white jurors and 2 jurors of color, black jurors. I think the pool had been larger, and the defense made objections to, because you start with a pool of about 100 or 50 and you work your way down to 12 fair ones, okay? So during that selection there's a lot of back and forth and lawyering. And the prosecutors the defense attorneys did object and say that the prosecutors were excusing too many black jurors, which is something you've really got to watch for when you're a defense attorney picking a jury. Arguably the most important part of a trial is picking a jury. We should talk about that sometime. So race played a factor there. I think race will play a factor in the deliberations. 20 years after O.J. Simpson, people are still talking about that jury was largely people of color, and people are speculating on the impact that had on that ruling. So yeah, race is going to play a point, and that's not exactly a balanced jury, and that's not exactly a jury of Bill Cosby's peers if it's 10 white and 2 black.
It is not. It is not. So a lot of interesting developments. We will keep abreast of this on a weekly basis, Jake. We're going to invite you back next week.
Excellent.
Let us know what's going on.
I look forward.
But I will tell you, Bill Cosby's case is looking a lot better since that ruling.
Yes.
Looking a lot better. Looking a lot better. We'll see what happens. Jake, thank you for joining us here on Celebrity Rap Sheet.
I'll see you on the next installment.
Yes. So in this installment of Celebrity Rap Sheet here on The Brad Show Live, we are still actively watching, intently watching every moment of the Bill Cosby trial that is going on in suburban Philadelphia as we speak right now. I have with me our criminal defense attorney here at Spar and Bernstein, Jake Hudnut, who is following Bill Cosby every day, I guess, in between court appearances. I'm laughing because I'm like, you can't watch it as it's going on. You follow it after the fact because you're in court every day representing your own clients. So I'm laughing I'm like, it's not like you're literally Or
Yeah.
maybe you are literally watching it.
God bless smartphones.
So maybe you are in between court appearances. So the sexual assault trial is now in its second week. The complainant, Andrea Constant, I believe, has taken the stand against Bill Cosby. This is the woman who claims that he forced himself on her and had non-consensual sex with her. Bill Cosby said, nah, it was consensual. What has she said on the stand so far?
Okay, so she has so far had 2 days of testimony. The trial's actually moving at a pretty remarkable pace. All 5 of the prior accusers testified last week. And she testified as expected that in 2004, while she worked for the management of the Temple basketball team, where Bill Cosby was very involved as an alumnus and as a donor, and I believe he was on the board of trustees, that she had occasion to be at his home one evening. She came over. She felt stressed. She represents that he offered her 3 small, I believe, blue pills. She took them thinking maybe they were herbal medicine. I don't know why you would trust anything Bill Cosby would give you other than Jell-O, right?
I don't know.
Wasn't he the Jell-O guy?
Well,
in the
he
90s?
was the Jell-O guy, but he was also Cliff Huxtable.
Yeah,
and he was a doctor on television.
Bingo.
So, Cliff Huxtable, he's a doctor on television.
Could go
if he
either way.
gave me 3 pills, I would take it. I wouldn't think that the guy would throw himself on me, and apparently she didn't either.
No, so
okay?
she popped the pills thinking that she would relax.
Right.
But before she knew it, she came to and could not move anything. Her limbs were completely, I guess, paralyzed.
So what kind of pills would this have been?
I don't know.
Just a paralysis pill?
That's outside my wheelhouse.
It's outside your
Maybe
wheelhouse.
Some Spanish horsefly.
I don't know. I don't know what kind of pill would paralyze you.
Well, like a roofie.
Like a roofie.
Yeah.
Now, Cosby said he did give her pills, okay, but it was Benadryl, but we're going to talk about that in a second.
Yes.
Okay, because Benadryl wouldn't paralyze you, obviously.
No.
All right, so she became incapacitated.
Yes, and she was aware that his digits were inside her. That she felt as if she was being penetrated digitally, and she testifies that his male member was exposed.
What do you mean his digits?
His fingers.
His fingers. Oh, okay. I didn't know what that meant. Okay.
I'm trying to keep it above board.
Well,
and legal
no, just say it as it is. I didn't even understand what that meant. All right.
For
So
our
now Bill Cosby says what? Did they cross-examine her?
Yes, they did. And I'll say this. Cosby has not testified at this time. The state has not rested yet, so that's a decision that him and his lawyers will make once the state rests. But of course, he has the right to confrontation under the United States Constitution, so she has been cross-examined by his lawyers. And I have to say this, they have a very consistent message. A good defense attorney always has their quote-unquote elevator pitch, which is basically their version of the state's case. Their version is that she is a con artist looking for her payday, and it seems that almost all of their questions kind of come back to that. They have talked about her $3.4 million civil suit settlement that she did in the years since this allegation took place. The lead attorney also went through several prior statements that she's given. Mind you, too, not only has she given statements to police, but she was deposed in the civil suit, and she had a prior trial that resulted in a hung jury. So these are all prior statements that she's made under oath, and they're impeaching her with them.
Why is this brought up at all? Because it just makes no sense, because you referred to the digits. Why would that would be like a very sexually perverse thing to do? I mean, if somebody wants to rape somebody, they wouldn't be using their fingers, right? Or no, or maybe, I don't know, unless everybody's different and weird, I guess, in what they do. I mean, but is that some sort of defense that, this is just a weird thing to have been accused of versus what would be like a normal?
I'll say this, in fact, in having defended sexual assault cases myself, the way these statutes are written, penetration is defined very loosely, for lack of a better word, right? So even oral contact, okay, can be charged the same way that penis into a vagina can be charged. Okay, so it's basically penetration. Once a part of one person's body enters another person's body, really what part it is you're talking about doesn't matter so much.
So, and what about everybody's prior sexual history. Cosby's been accused by a whole bunch of people, and they've all testified that he's done this to them.
Yes.
Has anyone brought up it's Andrea Constant's past sexual history? And how is that? And how would that be used if it can be?
They have not, and it'd be very hard for the defense to bring that in. Almost all states have what's called a rape shield law, which limits a defense attorney and a defendant's ability to bring in a victim or a complainant's past sexual conduct, right? You can't say, oh, she's promiscuous. You can't line up a bunch of men she's had sex with and say, oh, well, of course this was consensual. Look at all these men she's had sex with. There is rape shield laws that would prevent that from happening.
So you're watching this on a regular basis. How do you see it going so far? Did Andrea score some points for the prosecution? And did Cosby's defense team score enough points to poke enough holes in the story to put some doubt in what she's saying?
I think that the defense is behaving very consistently, and I think their message is very on point. They're not asking questions in cross-examine just for the sake of asking questions. Every one of their questions goes toward this portrait of a person who had consensual sex, regretted it, they argue, perhaps because he was married, and then devised a scheme to sort of milk it for money. Not only are they consistent that way in the media with what they're saying outside in the courthouse steps when they're interviewed, but all of their questions are going toward that, and I think they're leaving a very, very clear picture in the jury's mind of somebody who is just saying what she needs to say to get her payday.
Now, so you think so far it's going as well for Cosby as you can imagine?
I mean, it's a tough spot, and I don't mean to minimize what this woman is purporting that she went through, but I have to analyze it as a lawyer, and as a lawyer, I think that they're doing a very consistent, good job. And keep in mind, when you're a defendant, it's not an easy thing, because not only, in this case, you have a victim who's going to, and this is a woman with a career, she presents well, who's coming forward and saying this man did something, but also you have the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania sitting at that same table saying, yes, this man did this. So anytime you're accused of a crime, it's an uphill climb. And so you really need to be dedicated, you need to be thorough, and that's what I think the defense is doing so far.
When we represent people and we represent our clients, especially clients who are victims, because we've represented victims too as criminal defense attorneys, as well as clients who are accused of crimes. But certainly if we're going to be representing a victim, we don't want our client to be dragged through the mud. That's the whole purpose of getting representation. And especially somebody who is accusing somebody, a celebrity who is very famous, and in this case, Bill Cosby, extraordinarily famous, of something completely inappropriate, improper, disgusting, being raped, being violated, and that's a very personal thing. How is it that we know everything about Andrea Constance? Doesn't she have attorneys, or doesn't she have representatives saying, hey, let's keep, you know what, she's accused Bill Cosby of something, she's coming forward, she's a victim. This has nothing to do with money, because quite frankly, she's already been paid money. This has to do with justice. And yet, sometimes you say, well, maybe there is no justice because now she's being dragged through the mud.
Right, and that would be her right to kind of stand back. And the only reason that we know Andrea Constance's name is because she has actually given permission to the newspapers and the media to use it. I talked a moment ago about rape shield statutes. They also contain a second part that a person who makes a sexual abuse allegation against an individual, that their name can remain private from the press. But Andrea Constance has decided to put her name into play and be visible and be a spokesperson and raise awareness to this issue. And in fact, when you read most newspaper coverage of this trial, at the bottom it will say that her name is being used with her permission.
Does that play at all into the defense to say, hey, maybe she's looking to profit on this a second time and become famous from this? Are they allowed to bring that up in terms of impeaching her character, that generally a victim would not want to be dragged through the mud, but in this case, she is purposely putting herself out there?
I think certainly, I don't know that they've touched on that in the cross-examination. If they did, I guarantee you that the state's attorney or the prosecutor would object to that and argue that her invoking a right or waiving a right isn't really fair game. But that's a very good point. I certainly would expect a prosecutor, if I was about to do that to an alleged victim, I'd be talking kind of slow because I'd be expecting the prosecutor to jump up and object.
So what's up next now in the Cosby trial? It's going on pretty fast. What's up next?
So the state will eventually rest, and then it'll be up to Bill Cosby's team whether they put on a defense. I mean, the interesting thing in criminal law is that the defendant doesn't have to put on a case at all. I've done 15 trials. I think I've only maybe put on a case 4 times. The burden is 100% always on the prosecutor. So they will make that decision whether they will call any witnesses, and then part of that decision will be whether Bill Cosby himself takes the stand, which is obviously an enormous risk for any defendant to take.
Well, I think he only takes the stand if they think that his case is really going downhill, where he would have to rebut what is being said about him and what happened on that incident. I think if things are going well for him, you're not going to see him testify.
Agreed.
And if the defense team thinks that he has a very good chance of being found guilty, I think you're going to go see him testify. He's obviously a fantastic actor, spokesperson. He can weave a very good, believable story and become a believable person. So I think they'll use that if they have to.
Yes. And of course, if he doesn't testify, the judge will give that instruction to the jury. Don't hold it against him. That's his right. So he'll be protected if he doesn't testify. All
right. Well, Jake Hudnut, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Keep us updated on Cosby. Another segment of Celebrity Rap Sheet. So in this episode of Celebrity Rap Sheet, I'm joined by Jake Hudnut. Bill Cosby verdict is in. Last week, he was convicted of drugging and sexually violating Temple University employee Andrea Constant at a suburban Philadelphia home in 2004. He claims the encounter was absolutely consensual. Spar and Bernstein's criminal defense attorney, Jake Hudnut, is joining me today. He's been following, and he is going to update us on the Cosby retrial and its repercussions. So, Jake, Bill Cosby, he's 80 years old. He broke racial barriers in Hollywood. He reached superstardom. He was America's dad in The Cosby Show in the late 1980s. His first trial ended in a hung jury. Was this jury's decision to convict Bill Cosby a surprise to you?
Yes, very much so. I thought the defense team had a very strong message and that they were very consistent. And for a case with this much at play, this much put into evidence from both the defense and the prosecution, to have a verdict in, I guess, less than, it was over 2 days of deliberation, but I think maybe about 7 hours altogether. A very big surprise, and on top of it, that it was a guilty verdict.
Yeah, I thought it was a surprise too, and then when I heard that they were coming back with a very quick decision, I was thinking in my head, innocent.
Right.
That's usually what it is.
Yes, because if you're going to send especially an 80-year-old man away to jail, you're going to want to think about it and cross your T's and dot your I's. And usually a quick verdict can be a good thing, but not here.
And there was some evidence. There was some evidence to say that she was trying to frame him. She did admit it at some point. That evidence came into the trial, but it didn't seem like the jury really considered that. They really considered the testimony of the 5 other women who came on to say that they believe in a different time and in a different place that they were drugged by Cosby. And they also believed his testimony where he admitted 12 or 14 years prior to this incident that he did try to drug a woman and try to have sex with her.
Yes.
Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that he did it in that occasion, that it means he did it in this particular occasion. But the jury, at least one of the jurors, came back and said that's what sealed the deal for him.
Yes. Yes, and that's one of the things we caution clients. I mean, jurors, once they go in that jury room, you don't know what happens back there. They don't have to believe every witness. They don't have to give every witness the same weight. They're allowed to judge the credibility of each witness, and that's what they did here. And they clearly sided with the witnesses for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
So now he's out on bail awaiting sentencing, which I guess will be shortly.
Yes.
Okay. Now, how much prison time do you think he's facing?
I believe he was found guilty of 3 counts. Each carries up to 10 years in prison. They will most likely merge. You're not looking at a 30-year sentence because it was one incident. The counts will merge. But still, for an 80-year-old man, 10 years is serious. Do
they take into account that he's 80 years old, that if the judge says, okay, you're going to go to jail for 10 years, you may never see freedom again alive.
Certainly. I mean, the judge will have a sentencing range, and the judge can go either to the bottom or the top of that sentencing range, and I certainly think his age will, at least a defense attorney is going to argue that his age should put him at the bottom of that range. A prosecutor might say tough cookies. I mean, he did what he did. His age is irrelevant.
So now the deposition that was the damning deposition was his testimony from a prior case several years prior to this Andrea Constance incident, where he did admit in a deposition under oath that at a prior time to a prior different woman, he did give her some sort of drug and put it in her drink.
Yes.
What did the defense do to try to get that out of the trial? Because that was obviously the damning evidence.
Sure, and that's certainly something that will be revisited on appeal. I think this defense team did a very good job preserving many issues to raise on appeal. And they argued that just because they even kind of spun it, hey, he partied with Quaaludes in the 70s. What celebrity didn't? That doesn't mean that all these years later
he did it to this woman.
To this woman. But then there also was some deposition testimony that he did admit to giving her something. He just says it wasn't Quaaludes. So there's a little bit of a indication of inconsistency there.
Is there any possibility that the defense team can argue that Cosby should not serve any time in jail while his appeal is pending?
Absolutely. Many states have that option. You see that with celebrities quite a bit. Governor McDonnell in Virginia did not do jail time while his case was under review. The Bridgegate defendants in Jersey and New York right now are out on bail pending appeal. I'm certain you will see that application. I don't know the specifics of the law in Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, it's typically only an option for people with wealth and resources. But I certainly think,
because he can say they can have an ankle bracelet.
Right.
He can be monitored.
Yes.
He will pay for all of this monitoring.
Right. And I cut my teeth as a public defender in Jersey City. Our clients, when they went down, they were going to jail while they waited for their appeal. They did not have this luxury. But I think you'll certainly see that application being made.
So what else don't you think helped the Cosby case here besides this deposition that says in the 70s he admitted in a deposition he gave Molly to some women in a drink? What else didn't help him, his cause?
There were some theatrics in the courtroom. One of the Commonwealth's witnesses actually addressed Bill Cosby from the bench and said, "You remember this, don't you, Mr. Cosby?" very pointedly. The defense moved for a mistrial. It was denied, so there's another issue preserved to be revisited on appeal. But I think...
what do you think the success of an appeal would be for him?
Look, I mean, I'm trying to look at this from the middle of the road, not from my side of the aisle as a defense attorney. There's a lot of issues here, and there's a lot of, they're bringing in character evidence. They're bringing in women that weren't victims, but are talking about what's prior bad acts, as we've talked about on other episodes. If I'm an appellate attorney on this case, I'm going to have a field day because the judge was not cautionary in these rulings. The judge really helped the state make their case, and I think there's some really good issues to visit here on appeal. Yeah,
my guess is going to be, if I had to put money on, Cosby is going to have an ankle bracelet on and be in his home while this is all being appealed.
Yes.
My guess is because of his age and his wealth and his celebrity that he is going to at least serve his time with some sort of bracelet in his home with some sort of monitoring and not be in jail. But hey, I was surprised that he was found guilty.
Sure.
I thought he was going to be found innocent. Did the defense try to say anything about the Me Too movement? With the, now it's Harvey Weinstein and Charlie Rose and all the different, Matt Lauer, all of these celebrities being caught up in the Me Too movement. Cosby now being that the number one guy, I guess, until Weinstein comes to trial at some point in the future. But what did the defense say about all that?
They certainly, when discussing with the media, they think that he is a victim of the Me Too movement. I mean, this is not a good time to be picking a jury on this issue. This is at the forefront of everyone's mind. I certainly think that the prosecutor had some more freedom to kind of hint to Me Too. I don't think you heard Me Too said by either of the attorneys in opening or closing statements, but the flavor of it was certainly there,
right.
and the defense attorneys have said in the media that they think it spilled into this.
Well, everybody saw Bill Cosby's reaction to this, He called the prosecutor. He stood up. He called the prosecutor an a-hole.
Said, I'm sick of him.
Right.
Referred to himself in the third person. A little bit of Donald Trumpism there. Quite the outbreak there. Not a good thing for a client to be doing when you're trying to get him to be, because the judge could have remanded him right there. That's always when you get a guilty verdict, that's the risk, that they're going to slap the cuffs on the client right there.
Yeah, if the one thing that would cause the judge, I think, to put him in jail pending the appeal was that outburst.
Sure.
It's certainly not going to help him.
No. Addressing a prosecutor directly, never good.
Yeah. Jake Hudnut, any last thoughts on this?
Bill Cosby's wife today gave a statement, and she said that this was mob justice, that this was more about everything going on outside the courtroom than what was going on inside the courtroom. As a defense attorney and an advocate for the accused and wanting everyone to get a fair shake in the courtroom, I think those are some powerful words, and I think unfortunately there might be some truth to them.
Well, there has to be some truth to them, because everybody, when you have a juror, or you going sitting and listening to a case, you're taking everything you've learned in the world up to that moment into that case. You're not a blank slate, to be ready to be painted. You've had experiences. You've lived a life. You've read a newspaper. You've seen what's been going on. So everybody comes in tainted, saying, you know what, in this last year and a half, there has been a Me Too movement. So maybe it seeped into the jurors' minds. You don't know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, Jake Hudnut, fantastic job. And by the way, he's a fantastic trial attorney, criminal defense attorney. God forbid you or anybody is arrested or charged with a crime or being investigated. Give Jake Hudnut a call. Give Spar and Bernstein a call. We have a fantastic criminal defense team. Not only Jake, David Moreno, Paul Hirsch. Our telephone number is 1-800-529-5465, 1-800-LAW-LINK, 1-800-529-5465. Jake, thanks a lot.
Thank you.